Hello everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to be introducing you all to a little side project that I've had in the works over these past few weeks, which is this 1/25th scale 1978 Trans Am. As cool and iconic as a late 70s Trans Am may be, the car itself is actually not really going to be the focus of this project, though I'll be talking more about this kit a little later on. What is the focus is the rear suspension. A late 70s Trans Am such as this would have come from the factory with a leaf spring rear suspension. In fact, many 60s and 70s era muscle cars and pony cars came from the factory with leaf springs as well. As you can see, it's a very simple suspension design. No links, coil springs, or any other major components are necessary. It looks like with a lot of these older muscle cars, they didn't have much beyond the leaf springs and a set of shocks. A very simple design at its core, though of course there are a lot of variables such as where the axle is positioned, the design of the pack, and I'm sure many other things were considered by the engineers at the time. It's because of this simplicity though, and the fact that many of the full-size vintage muscle cars RC builders are replicating used these leaf spring setups, that we've received many requests to come up with some kind of leaf spring rear suspension for use with these model car to RC conversions. So that's the quest for this project. Can we make leaf springs that work for a model car to RC conversion? Well, let's find out. Although the leaf spring design might be simple, finding a material to use as the spring has proven to be a bit tricky. Not much exists as far as off-the-shelf leaf springs in the world of 1/24 scale RC. Spring steel has been a popular suggestion, but everything metal that I've been able to try so far is way too stiff. Ideally, I want the rear suspension to move when driving over bumps, and the body to pitch during hard acceleration or braking. Remember, these model car-based RC vehicles usually don't weigh much more than a few ounces, so the springs need to be pretty darn soft to have any sort of movement. There's probably some metal options out there that would work well. I've yet to try using brass, which some people have apparently had success with, but I've put the brakes on using metal as of right now. By comparison, the 3D printed leaf springs have some advantages, but also some disadvantages. For one, they're easier to make since all I have to do is draw them up in CAD, press a few buttons, and bam, I have as many perfectly identical leaf springs as I could ever want in just a few minutes. Another advantage of 3D printing that I found was that I have virtually unlimited tuning. With simple, subtle modifications such as the number of leaves in the pack, the thickness of the leaves, the length of each leaf, the shape, the width, I can really fine-tune the rear suspension and get it to work how I want. Of course, it's probably worth pointing out that if I was using coil springs like on many of my previous RC builds, suspension tuning is a lot easier. If I want a softer suspension, I can simply choose a softer spring or change the length of the spring. While I still can fine-tune it here, it's a little more time-consuming to have to print a new part each time. Another advantage though with printing is that it's easy for me to share the STL files with all of you, so all you builders out there can use them for your own projects. Can't really do that with a one-off handmade item. There is one pretty serious downside though, and that's that 3D printed leaf springs don't like to keep their shape. Enough use or simply sitting for too long is going to flatten the leaves out, and before too long you'll end up with a lowrider with the frame sitting on the axle. Unfortunately, it's been a bit of a paradox for me lately, as I can either have a nice soft suspension that works well but doesn't last long, or a long-lasting suspension that, well, doesn't really work like a suspension, more like a solid I-beam. I'll definitely need to do some more experimenting, but I guess one silver lining is, with the nature of 3D printing your own parts, if you need a new part, you just press a few buttons, and after a few minutes, you've got a brand new leaf spring for less than a penny's worth of plastic. Also, something that I didn't do, but I'd imagine storing the car elevated so there's no weight on the suspension would probably prolong its life quite a bit. Another potential solution would be to simply use a standard coil spring along with these leaf springs. As you can see, I've designed a piece that the coil spring can sit on, and that is one potential option for prolonging the life of the leaf springs and maybe offering a little better performance as well. Just an idea I might explore later on. Now, just in general, while leaf springs do have their advantages, they certainly have some disadvantages as well. Things like axle wrap may become an issue, but we'll wait for the first test drive to see how things go and make changes as needed from there. Coming up with a set of 3D printed leaf springs that work well will be a challenge, but where's the fun if you don't have to work for it? Enough said about that though, let's move on to taking a look at the model kit that I'll be using. So I thought I'd talk a bit about the model kit that I'm using for this project, which is this AMT 1978 Trans Am Pro Shop pre-painted kit. These kits were released about 20 years ago. I've kind of hacked up mine a little already, as you can see, and the previous owner partially assembled some parts of the kit, but hopefully you can still get a good look at it. Everything comes pre-painted and decorated, all you have to do is assemble the model. The fit and finish of these cars isn't amazing in my opinion. The paintwork and decals are okay. If you can find one of these kits for like 20 bucks, which is what I paid for this one, they're not bad, but you'll find these cars listed on eBay for over 100, and in my opinion, these just aren't worth that kind of money. The only real advantage I see to these is if you absolutely don't want to have to paint anything, but really in my opinion, you can do way better for that kind of money. But regardless, I scored this one for a fair price, and it's a nice looking car to base this build on, and it should look pretty sweet once finished. I'm not sure if I'm going to be modifying the appearance of this car in any way, but I'm open to your suggestions and ideas as to how you think that I should build this thing. With that look at the model kit complete, let's focus in on the rear suspension. As you can see, I've already begun working on the car, but I thought I'd just jump in at this stage and catch you guys up with the work that's been done so far. So it might not look too pretty, but I've got everything installed. I did have to remove some material from each one of these 4 sections of the chassis to create a nice flat space for each one of these mounts to be glued to. Right now I'm just doing kind of a quick and dirty buildup of this car, but if all goes well, I'll probably remove all of the rear suspension, tear off these mounts that I glued to the model kit chassis piece, and go ahead and really finish it up, paint it, make it look a lot better than what it does now, but for now it'll work. I don't know if you'll notice, but I did eyeball the location of all these mounts when I put them in, and I got the axle centered up and aligned pretty well, not perfectly. Again, if all goes well, I can always come back and kind of measure things out a little better. Just kind of doing a quick build up right now. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how the car is progressing. However, there's a few things that I need to address. First, and maybe most obvious, is that the axle is sitting way too low in the car right now. It should be way higher up in the wheel well. I have designed some parts that will make this axle sit a little bit higher up. Also, the suspension needs to be just a little bit softer than it is right now, although it is close. Another thing that's not helping with the position of the rear axle is the model kit chassis sits way too low. With that interior in place, I just can't push that chassis up as high as I think it should go. So to actually expand on that point, when I had a look at the model that they built for the photos on the box, take a look at the distance between this rear wheel arch and the rear wheel. Also note how far down the leaf springs stick out from the bottom. It's not ideal, but I'll make it work. I don't think I'm going to use this interior tub that was included with the model kit. I've actually been working on designing my own custom interior piece for this model. The electronics I plan on using with this car aren't going to fit too well if I have the full depth interior tub in place, so what I'm going to do is something very similar that I did on the 74 Gremlin build. Basically, I'm going to be 3D printing my own custom shallow interior piece, which I'll be securing to the body, and that will leave plenty of room for the electronics below. That will also allow this chassis piece to sit up just a little bit higher, which is going to help with the axle alignment. One final thing I want to do is just move the axle towards the rear of the car slightly. Like I said, I eyeballed the position of everything, and right now it looks like it's sitting just a little too far forward. No big deal, that'll be an easy fix. I repositioned the mounting hole on the leaves slightly further towards the rear of the car, and I lowered down the spot that the leaves mount to so the axle sits higher up. I don't know if I'd call this the perfect solution, but it's an easy one. I went ahead and got these new parts installed. These were printed using PLA plastic, in case you were curious. I haven't yet experimented with printing the leaf springs in different materials. Something I'll mention while working on this is that these mounts right here can move. They can slide along the axle, so you have some adjustability on how wide or narrow the leaf springs are. They just clamp onto the axle with this hardware here, and they'll just slide right off. Here's a look at the axle with these new parts installed. The axle is now sitting several millimeters higher than it did before, so it should be positioned how I want it when I install this assembly on the car. Before doing that though, there was one modification I still wanted to make to the chassis, and that was grind down this area of the frame. This will give the axle more room to move. After getting the axle put in, I realized that I needed to remove some material from this area of the chassis around the driveshaft socket. Yeah, that's a lot of hacking, but at least now the axle is sitting just about right where I want it. This car is definitely more of a driver than a showpiece. There's still more work to do to get this rear suspension really dialed in, but so far it's coming together. While the axle is sitting just about perfectly in the car, I'm going to continue to try out some different leaf spring designs. It's close to being how I want it, but I'm always looking to make things even better. Overall though, the suspension doesn't feel too bad. It should work, but in my opinion, it's probably not quite there. Of course, along with getting the rear suspension dialed in, I also need to install a front suspension assembly and all of the electronics. Honestly, you at least to a certain degree really have to enjoy the custom building, problem solving, trial and error, and the engineering process to dive deep and really enjoy doing these types of custom model car to RC builds. These projects are a whole different ballgame than putting together an off-the-shelf RC kit, but as much of a pain as these builds can be, I do love the challenge. For all of you watching who are as crazy as I am and have access to a 3D printer, I will soon begin posting these STL files onto our Patreon page. Of course, your results may vary when you're using these 3D printed leaf springs, but if you'd like to give them a try and experiment for yourself, that option will be available to you. As I said before, this has been a highly requested project, so I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and of course more on this Trans Am and these new leaf spring rear suspensions to come. But that's going to be all for today's video. I want to thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.